What's a conversation about mobility without a discussion on autonomous vehicles? So without further ado, please welcome Ron Thaniel, Vice President of Legislative Affairs with the Intelligent Transportation Society of America, and Huei Peng, MCity Director and Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Michigan. The Hill's Editor-in-Chief, Bob Cusack, will lead this conversation.
Thank you for joining us. First, you both have long titles. What do you do day to day in your normal jobs, in your day jobs? Ron, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Bob. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I also want to recognize Huei with the University of Michigan and Qualcomm, the sponsor. They are both board members of ITS America. My day job is to go to the Hill and urge Congress to embrace the future of mobility. What we saw in that video is what ITS America believes is the future of transportation in this country. So my focus has been the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Law, making sure that that law prioritizes investment in technology. Also, of course, working on automated vehicle legislation, which has been a long effort. We're getting close, I do believe. But at the end of the day, it's also education, making sure that members of Congress, their staff, the administration, fully understand and embrace the opportunities that come with technology, and in this case, automated vehicles.
Huei, how about you? Normal day when you're not here.
When I'm not here. So I'm the director of MCity. So MCity is a public-private partnership at the University of Michigan focusing on research and early deployment of connected and automated vehicles. We focus on three things. Number one is laboratory development. Number two is research. Number three is education. So we built the world's first purpose-built test facility for connected and automated vehicles. We have a living laboratory in Ann Arbor, 2,800 connected cars, 65 intersections connected. We also deployed the first level 4 driverless shuttles on North American campuses. So these are just examples of what we do.
Just a quick follow-up to that. You've been working in this field for over 2 decades. Where have we come in that time, and where do you see autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles coming, and when is it going to be part of coming to an event like this?
Yeah, so my PhD dissertation at UC Berkeley is actually on automated vehicles. At that time, the sensors we use are magnetic wires, magnetic markers. Machine vision camera is a new thing. Radar is too expensive. LiDARs do not exist. Today, we have so much better everything, sensors, computers, everything is so much better. We are so much closer. In the meantime, I think the highly automated vehicles, the so-called chauffeur for your vehicles, they won't be sold to general public anytime soon. At the beginning, there will be a shared service, freight delivery, mobility on demand, and so forth, because they will still be not quite perfect, not quite anywhere, anytime, any speed, any weather. So there will be limitations. So the best use of these technologies is to use where they can serve a purpose for the community.
Ron, what do policymakers in Washington have to do as far as investment? I was talking to Congressman Davis earlier today, and he was not very optimistic about a transportation bill getting done. Of course, we had the President and Senator Schumer and Nancy Pelosi agree on a $2 trillion deal. That has just not formulated. How do you see the landscape moving forward in this Congress?
Sure, good question. First, I want to go back to the future of automated vehicles. And from our standpoint, it's important that we have a framework put in place to govern highly automated vehicles. And these are level 4, level 5 vehicles. At this point, there is not a federal law overseeing highly automated vehicles. So it's state by state. So what we have right now is really a patchwork of states doing their best to do what NHTSA should be doing, dealing with the design, construction, and performance of automated vehicles. So that is important. If we don't have that structure in place, quite frankly, we are concerned that we're going to lose this technology. And so again, my hope is that Congress, House and Senate, and it's happening right now, There are very good conversations going on between the House and Senate staff. The Senate side is the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and the House side is the Energy and Commerce Committee, working out a bipartisan bill that will protect the concerns of the states and cities over maintaining control with the operation of these vehicles on public roads, but also, again, getting back to what has worked, and that is maintaining the federal authority over the design, construction, and performance of the vehicles. Getting to the larger question, what is the future with infrastructure? We believe, while it's a tough environment, because the key question with the surface transportation law is how do you pay for it? And the tough question with AV legislation is, quite frankly, it is complicated, is that in this environment, if there is a path forward with legislation, infrastructure could be that bill. Infrastructure has always been that bipartisan legislation that can bring Republicans and Democrats and independents together, and we believe that is the case. Quite frankly, America's infrastructure is aging. Our bridges are crumbling. Our transit systems are at capacity, and there's a great need to move forward. So again, great leadership in both the House and Senate. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee did its job at the end of July and passed a very good reauthorization bill. And I know the Commerce Committee, the Banking Committee, and the Senate, they're working on their legislation. And on the House side, you have, again, Mr. Davis, who is ranking member on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, giving great leadership along with Chairman Peter DeFazio of Oregon. We hope to see a bill out of that committee shortly.
Well, just to follow up at that point, do you think in the next month, because DeFazio has been talking about moving something, whether it gets to the floor is another matter?
Well, we hope that we can see a bill by the end of the year, first part of 2020. I've worked closely with Chairman DeFazio's staff, and they are working on legislation to reflect the needs of this nation's infrastructure. And also thinking about what is to come, the future of mobility. And so I do expect a bill out of T&I shortly. I know the Commerce Committee, going back to the Senate side, they're working on a bill that will focus on safety, that will focus on technology, freight. And the Banking Committee, my understanding is that conversation is starting over there. So our hope, and in Washington, we have to be optimists here, we will see a bill sometime in the next year.
Huei, as far as the international competition, how is the United States stacking up on the future of mobility and transportation compared to other countries? And is there a need for investment that's not there now?
So in certain areas, for example, highly automated vehicles, US companies are still leading. Waymo, Cruise Automation, a few others, they're still the best, most advanced. In terms of more general intelligent transportation system, connected vehicles, in terms of lower level automation, for example, AEB, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, and so forth, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, Europe already have AEB mandated and already have included in their new car assessment program. US is catching up, so I don't think in this particular area, US is leading. And in terms of connected ITS, Japan and Europe are a little bit ahead of US. So I think investment is still very much needed in the US.
Talk a little bit about public-private partnerships. Is that the future of success?
So we always sell this idea to our members. So we have 60 industrial members, by the way. The idea is that any company, because this is such a new area, automated, connected are new, and you see increasing alliance between companies, right? So there are a lot of deals where people work together. There are competitive technologies. People can, or companies can work alone or with a selected strategic partner. On the other hand, there are also pre-competitive research questions or barriers they need to remove. For example, right, interoperability for connected vehicles, cybersecurity is definitely areas where people need to cooperate, because one car company got hacked, hurts the whole industry, for example. Motion sickness, cybersecurity. There are plenty of other examples where companies should work together. So the public-private partnership focusing on the pre-competitive research and barrier removal part of this new field.
Bob, if I could
Yeah,
get back
absolutely.
to the international question, because I think it's a good question. The uncertainty around one particular technology, and this is essentially connected vehicle technology. This technology, which is key to automated vehicles, an automated vehicle, I like to say it will have 4 senses. You have LiDAR, radar, photo, and there's a key 4th sense, which is connected vehicle. And so this will allow that vehicle to communicate with other cars, other vehicles, I should say, pedestrians and infrastructure. Because of the uncertainty around the spectrum, which is essentially known as 5.9 gigahertz spectrum, there are some industries that want that spectrum for other purposes, for example, Wi-Fi. You have automakers, technology companies, expressing caution as far as including this technology in their vehicles. And so the uncertainty created in Washington around the future use of this spectrum is potentially hurting the U.S. in our role in leading this space in the technology, which is really important for automated vehicles in particular.
On consumer confidence, which is very important, what is it going to take for consumers to be confident in the safety? Because that's key. So that these vehicles, when they're fully ready and we're all taking them, we have the confidence. And also, how do you prevent a driver really not paying attention when they need to be?
Right, so let's think about automated vehicles in different ways. So there are lower level automation where a driver is there and the robot, if you would, is just there being a co-pilot or your guardian. Right. And there are also higher level where the robot is your chauffeur, right? They are very different things. So for the lower level automated vehicles, you need to design your system considering the human's tendency of over-trust, over-reliance on the technology. So that happens before ABS, electronic stability control, your backup camera, and so on and so forth. There are also then a question about the highly automated vehicles. So I think we are, if I make an analogy, we are almost like the Wright brother airplane in Kitty Hawks. They don't fly very far, they don't fly very fast. In the meantime, and in the early days, many people don't trust airplanes. They don't want to use airplane. But today, I think we know that they can fly all the way from New York to Australia and so forth, and get there in reasonably short time. I think it's the same analogy. So in order to win trust and people say, yes, this is a technology I need to use because it's safer, cheaper, and so forth, I think we need both things. One is technology need to be improved. In other words, we want to leave some room for innovation to happen. In the meantime, the engineers, the scientists, the companies need to develop the system in a cautious way. We don't want to show that we are too, how do you call it, cowboyish or cavalier in developing this technology, pushing its limit too far.
Ron, you mentioned the states before. Are there, and I know that the federal government's kind of stuck a bit, at least not being able to pass a big transportation bill, but do you see innovation at the state level? And if so, what states are good for others to mimic?
Sure. Getting back quickly to the consumer confidence with automated vehicles. From our standpoint, one of the key, we have to test the vehicles. And we have to increase the number of exemptions allowed so that we can get more vehicles on the road to test those. Right now, the cap is 2,500. A vehicle is much like a young human driver. The more that driver, that young teenager drives that vehicle, the more experience they will have. So we gotta get the vehicle on the road. We got to get the vehicles on the road and test them as much as possible to address the safety concerns. Dealing with the issue of infrastructure, again, and what we're seeing in our cities and states. It is really exciting. What we see, for example, in Washington, D.C., I rode a jump bike here to work this morning. I guess I'm considered a super sharer, in which I use a jump bike, I will use a traditional yellow cab midday, and I'll use a Uber to go and pick up my daughter after work. And that is really the future of transportation, not just in urban cities, but suburbs and also rural areas. We call it mobility on demand. This is essentially pulling out your phone in deciding the best option to get to your destination. Now, we hope that it is the most sustainable option, but that is the future. No longer, I always like to give this example, and I know we only have a couple minutes, so I'll be quick. In the 90s, when I was a teenager growing up in Baltimore, and I had to catch the bus down to the Inner Harbor to work at a restaurant, I had to depend on that schedule that was at the bus shelter, or perhaps a schedule on the bus. Today, it's take your phone out your pocket, look at the schedule, figure out if that's the best way to get to your destination. But at the same time, you have other options as well. That's innovation, and that's what technology is delivering to the transportation system.
But along those lines, everyone in the New York, DC, Acela corridor thinks that everyone has internet. I mean, broadband's a big part of this, especially in the rural areas, because not everyone does. Do you think that's something that Washington's got to address, or is that more of a state responsibility?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a Washington responsibility. ITS America firmly supports including broadband in the FAST Act reauthorization. FAST Act reauthorization is the Surface Transportation Law. Mm-hmm. Broadband is a form of transportation. And so from our standpoint, a major reauthorization bill must be more than just roads, bridges, and transit. It must also include broadband as well. Mm-hmm. And so federal funding should go towards helping rural communities and also urban areas, poor urban areas, build out broadband.
So Bob, can I go back to the consumer trust issue?
Yes.
So we always advocate that we need to use simulation technologies and also testing in a safe laboratory environment such as MCity first before you use public roads for the final verification or early deployment. So that's very important. So we shouldn't be jumping to use public roads as your way of testing the safety and performance of this unproven technology.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we open it for questions? We've got a few minutes left. If you can raise your hand, we'll go third row. Just identify yourself and ask your question.
John Wetmore with pedestrians.org. In terms of federal regulations, what would you like to see those regulations say in terms of vehicles' ability to detect, identify, and interact with pedestrians?
I can take care of this. Yes, if you look at the Senate bill, it's very clear within that bill that a manufacturer of an automated vehicle must prove to the U.S. DOT NHTSA that vehicle can detect a human being. And of course, the big issue today is, and I was talking to someone earlier today, can that vehicle detect a person of color? That's a big discussion right now. And from our standpoint, the automakers, technology companies must be able to show that that vehicle can do that. And if you do, again, I don't want to get too in the weeds on legislation. The Senate bill included a section that required the automakers and the technology companies to complete to show that their vehicle is ready to get on the road, and that was known as a safety evaluation report.
Hi, my name is Rima Owayed. This might sound a little bit out of scope, but in light of the fact that the highway bill allows for $1 billion to go towards electric vehicle infrastructure. We know the VW settlement introduced another $2.9 billion that is going to states that can also be used towards electric vehicle infrastructure, some portion of that. Thinking about the future, with almost $4 billion out there today that could be spent. What I haven't heard is this other variable that we probably should be thinking about, because transportation, we know, uses energy, right? And bidirectional batteries in cars could provide an innovative way for vehicles to be able to provide dynamic energy to the grid and to buildings. And when we talk about systems, we should be thinking about dynamic systems and how vehicles could be part of a more dynamic city, right? Just to give you a point of reference, in Europe, 18 European utilities got together and invested in an electric vehicle infrastructure company that is building out electric vehicle infrastructure throughout Denmark and Finland, and companies are converting their fleets to electric vehicles and monetizing their bidirectional batteries. Nissan is one of the primary providers. of these bidirectional batteries. But we're not really seeing deployment of that here in the US. And more manufacturers should be developing these types of batteries as well, and we could be thinking about our systems in those terms, so that we're not just building infrastructure because this is how we're using it today, when the technology is here, but it's just a matter of coordination to really enlighten the future.
You want to take that?
Yeah, I think there are two facts maybe we need to consider. Number one, batteries in cars have a warranty implication. And if you do bidirectional, and you are actually using or wearing the battery. So that is one concern. The second is, actually what we need is not bidirectional energy supply. All we need is an energy storage device that mitigate the intermittency due to the, say, solar and wind power, right? So those are the future, going to be a bigger percentage of the electricity on the grid. And if we are able to just mitigate the charging, not necessarily reversing the charging direction, it's already very helpful, and they can serve as so-called demand response for the grid people. So that's all they need. They don't necessarily need to use a bidirectional battery energy.
If I could just speak from a legislative standpoint, the future mobility is electric. And so a key concern for ITS America is to make sure that the next surface transportation reauthorization includes funding to help states and cities build out their electric vehicle, alternative vehicle fueling infrastructure.
We talked a little bit about public stakeholders, but what about private stakeholders? For either one of you, what's the role of automakers and others in the field? How can they help?
Yeah, so certainly I think the most important driving force for all of this is safety, right? Mm-hmm. They all think that by deploying AEB, adaptive cruise control, and so forth, even some other forms of guardian or co-pilot function, they can make driving safer, which indirectly will save energy and reduce congestion. So that's the most important thing. And I think right there, they already have full motivation, reason to do this. And there also, many companies are worrying that the so-called motor company days are over, and they need to at least start to move to mobility company directions.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. The future of mobility in this country, in many ways, is being driven by the private sector. When I think of our members, our automakers, our research universities, our technology companies, the vision for tomorrow is being developed today. And whether it's automated vehicles, connected vehicles, I didn't recognize Uber. Uber's a member of ours as well, scooters, bikes. It's all happening because of the innovation that they are putting on the table. No longer are they just thinking about building that car that we've known for many years. They are thinking about urban mobility and the different types of mobility that we want now. I always point to the term of choice. And at the end of the day, I am happy to say that the automakers, technology companies, research universities are doing just that. They are working to give us choice in mobility. My last point, and I always like to do this, is we've spent a lot of time talking about automated vehicles. Transit investment is key. We cannot walk away from a commitment to improving the nation's transit system. The whole shared economy is based on sharing different modes of mobility. And again, I may ride a bike this morning, I may ride in a car this afternoon. At some point, I'm getting on transit. And if we continue to neglect our transit systems, you can have a breakdown in the whole sharing concept.
That's a good point. We've run out of time. Please thank our panelists for joining us this afternoon.